Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Dan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about Captain Wentworth's letter. Everybody swoon. We are so excited to welcome our guest, Margaret H. Willison. Margaret serves as part of the communications team for Not Sorry Productions, which produces several podcasts, including Hot and Bothered, which recently concluded their season on Pride and Prejudice, titled Live from Pemberley. Margaret also serves as faculty for Not Sorry's virtual classes, pilgrimages, and other programming, including multiple Jane Austen-themed pilgrimages to various locations in the UK. Based in Boston, where she grew up, Margaret has a BA in English and History from Kenyon College and a Master's in Library Science from Simmons University. Welcome, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Getting to analyze one of my favorite parts of all of Austen's work.
Well, we are thrilled to have you, and obviously I can't wait to get into this letter as well. This is going to be fun.
This is a real moment for Zan. Of all the romantic moments in all the novels, this is Zan's number one. So she's going to be a bit beside herself, I feel like, for this episode.
I will try to stay calm, but also I won't try that hard, you know?
Yeah, and that's fair and reasonable. Getting into this episode, this is all about Captain Wentworth's letter, which means that for this episode, we are near the very end of Persuasion. Anne has gone over to the White Hart to spend the day with the Musgroves, and everyone is engaged in various conversational groupings. And at one point, Anne joins Captain Harville. He shows her a portrait miniature of Captain Benwick that was intended for Harville's sister, but that is now being set for Louisa. And Harville has a lot of feelings about this.
Yes.
So Harville and Anne engage in a bit of a gentle debate on the constancy of women, and Anne finally says, "All the privilege I claim for my own sex, it is not a very enviable one, you need not covet it, is that of loving longest, when existence or when hope is gone." And, one Captain Wentworth just happens to overhear this exchange, and, he has some feelings about it, and he dashes off a letter to Anne, which, after some machinations involving some left-behind gloves, he hands to her before just running out the door like the Kool-Aid man. He's like, "Here's the letter, goodbye." And yes, we will now be reading this letter in its entirety because how could we not?
I fought for this, right? I needed this whole letter. So, I didn't have to fight hard. Diane is very kind.
I was like, do we need to cut this down? It is a lot of text. And Zan was like, absolutely not. We will be reading the entire letter.
Every word.
That is fair. Fair.
But now I have the pressure of reading this gorgeous letter. I have to read it and do it justice. So we're going to give it a try. We're going to do our best. So here we go.
We have faith in you.
I can listen no longer in silence. I must speak to you by such means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. Tell me not that I am too late, that such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own than when you almost broke it 8 years and a half ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman, that his love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath. For you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail to have understood my wishes? I had not waited even these 10 days could I have read your feelings, as I think you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. I am every instant hearing something which overpowers me. You sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones of that voice when they will be lost on others. Too good, too excellent creature, you do us justice indeed. You do believe that there is true attachment and constancy among men. Believe it to be most fervent, most undeviating. In F.W. I must go, uncertain of my fate, but I shall return hither or follow your party as soon as possible. A word, a look, will be enough to decide whether I enter your father's house this evening or never. wow. Let's let that just sit
Heady,
for a
heady
moment.
stuff.
Yeah, like just
Yeah.
I do love that he's a man with a plan. He's like, also, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to return or I'm going to follow your party. Don't worry. Like, we are going to circle round. It's going to be fine.
He's like, I am on a mission. Yes, definitely. Well, now that we have had a moment to collect ourselves, maybe we should start with our reactions to this letter, since it's kind of a canon event for Austen readers. So do you remember the first time that you read Wentworth's letter and your reactions?
So I don't exactly, because I know that the first time I read Persuasion, I was slightly too young for it, and it was so dark that it didn't quite work for me. I remember being very struck, particularly by the fact that Miss Smith almost doesn't tell her about Mr. Elliot, and then sort of the griminess of all of that really weighed on me, and I was like, I don't know if I really get this. But then I came back to it. I came back to it later on in life, and I was felled.
Like a tree in the woods, just
Absolutely
knocked over.
Yeah, I'd had a little bit of the stuffing kicked out of me by life. And once that's happened, Persuasion is a great book to read, right?
Yeah.
Because you understand Mrs. Smith better, and you also understand Anne Elliot so much better.
Yeah.
And that's what makes seeing her being the object of a letter this intelligent and impassioned, it makes it so rewarding.
Yeah. Well, and I love that your experience was actually a second time was the time that you had, because this is like one of the famous second chance romances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for you to have a second, to give Persuasion a second chance, to have this moment
Absolutely.
is really, that's fantastic. So poetic.
I just naturally lead a poetic life.
We aspire, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember the first time that I read this, I did love Persuasion from the get-go, even though I was a fairly youngish teenager when I read it.
Yeah. Some people are more discerning than others.
And I think I don't know that it was discernment. It was pining. I understood pining.
Yeah.
As much as a teenage soul can understand unrequited love, And so this moment of this man being willing to put his heart kind of in a letter and hand it to someone was like, this is everything that I want and need. As someone who has a romantic mind, this is what I want. When he's literally saying that, I'm offering you my heart. I was just like, oof, okay. I'm into that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what my initial reaction to this letter was. I would have been an early teen the first time I read the novel. And I honestly don't recollect, which I feel like everyone is now thinking that I have no feelings. And but I don't remember being taken with it. I think the way that so many people are taken with it. I mean, I think perhaps I might just be more of if I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more kind of person.
Fair.
Sure.
It's almost uncomfortable to read sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's very intense.
Yeah. It's like flourless chocolate cake.
Yes.
Right? You need something to cut it a little bit. You need a little bit of espresso. Just balance it out.
It is very intense.
But so delectable.
So, kind of moving away from these initial reactions, let's get a little bit technical and focus on this actual letter as the medium for this communication, this big moment. But, they're not actually talking to each other. But this is a letter that Wentworth drafts on the spot while he's actively listening to Anne and Harville, and then almost immediately delivers to Anne. So even though they're not speaking with each other, it's not like he wrote this letter alone in his rooms, it was kind of like he sort of is in conversation with her. And then she almost immediately reads this after he leaves the room. So there's a lot of layered and compressed communication happening in this very rapid fire sequence.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why Austen chooses a letter for Wentworth to finally address Anne in this big pivotal moment.
I think it's almost necessary because so much of this novel is really interior to Anne Elliot's experience. She is a very quiet and a very contained character. So what we as a reader are experiencing is just deep communion with her understanding and her perspective and experience of the world. So you almost need to have something like a letter, because when you read, that's processed through your own perspective to an even greater degree than like a person being in front of you. It's like you need to have that direct relationship where like Anne's eyes and your eyes can be regarding exactly the same thing and having exactly the same strong response to it. And I think that that's so important. I think it's so important to have it be that intense, because we really don't get to see Anne and Captain Wentworth together very often.
Right.
You know, just analyze this very carefully with my pilgrims, and they really only get to have like 3 conversations other than this letter. So we have this historical understanding of who they were to each other that we don't actually get to experience much on the page, but we have to believe that the seeds are still there, that the connection that drew them together 8.5 years ago. Also, love that he remembers and a half. It's
and
like,
a half, yes.
You were counting, sir. That's how you know he's really in love. I think that is, that's why you need something this heady. And that's why Austen provides it instead of deferring to her usual style of, if I loved you less, I could talk about it more. A line we should all be grateful no F-boys have ever learned about.
Right.
Too powerful in their hands. No one tell them.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about the fact that, you know, we are told right at the very beginning that they were just like 2 hearts, 1 mind kind of a situation, right? Like they were just the perfect couple. They were so in harmony. They were so in sync.
Can I possibly read a quote to support that?
Absolutely.
Yes. From earlier in the novel. Once so much to each other, now nothing. There had been a time when of all the large party now filling the drawing room at Uppercross, they would have found it most difficult to cease to speak to one another. There could have been no 2 hearts so open, no tastes so similar, no feelings so in unison, no countenances so beloved. Now they were as strangers, nay, worse than strangers, for they could never become acquainted. It was a perpetual estrangement.
Oof. I get goosebumps every time when I hear that particular, you know, that just, you know, there was 2 hearts. That I think that is so beautiful.
Just the litany there is like it's so perfect.
Yeah.
And it's so persuasive. As a fellow piner, although I feel one who came to it a little bit later in life, a saying that has a lot of weight with me that I feel this book illustrates really beautifully is like, nothing dies harder than potential, which is usually in the modern day like a bad thing, right? Because if someone's not realizing their potential in your life, generally speaking, it's a choice or an irresistible compulsion, and either one isn't great for you. But here there is this actual separation, this physical separation that occurs where this incredible potential for deep connection was experienced, and to get to see it revived again is so satisfying.
Well, and I think, you know, in the passage that you read as well, the fact that, you know, again, very famous lines, you know, that it was worse than strangers because they could never get acquainted again. That idea of what has held them apart since he comes back on screen, right? That thing that has been holding them apart is actually something I think that does connect to this idea of why the letter is so important too, because what this is signaling is that Wentworth is truly listening to Anne.
Yes.
This is something where, because they don't have a lot of conversations, you're absolutely right. They don't have a lot of conversations with each other, but both of them are so eagerly listening to each other throughout the novel. But this is one of those rare instances where we know that Wentworth is entirely focused on listening to Anne, and not just like, what is she saying, but like, what does she mean? Like, he's truly listening to her. This is similar. It's kind of like an echo of that moment when they have gone on that long walk and he knows that Anne is fatigued and he's like, you will get in the cart. Like, he knows. He's paying attention. But this is he's listening so acutely. And I think that is incredibly persuasive here as well. You know, the fact that he's not just listening, but he's like interacting with her through the letter.
Yes.
The fact that he's responding, you just said this, you just gave us credit. You know, the fact that he is attuned to her, I think, is one of my favorite nuances of the letter.
They're sort of having like a conversation via proxy with Harville, sort of, like he has no
100%.
idea. He has no idea that he's being like the intermediary, but that's essentially what is going on. And yeah, for somebody like Anne, who is oftentimes overlooked, to have somebody who she cares about show like, I am intently and intensely listening to you right now. Like I am so focused on everything that you're saying, and let me communicate that to you in this letter. That's a hard thing to resist, you know?
Yeah. And I think something else to note about that is just to think, like when I think about how my brain reacts when it's sort of like activated into counter argument mode, right? Is like once I would start something where it's like, I can listen no longer in silence, which I imagine being like, I had to pause the pod and call in, right? Right. Like once you do that, you're not necessarily, most people aren't continuing to listen to the conversation and adjust their understanding of it. It's like, nope, you've set me off on my tirade. I gotta go. And that's not what happens here, is he's still listening to her more than talking himself. He's still attuned to her. And frankly, the line, you sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones of that voice when they would be lost on others. Again, just like felled like a tree. Out. Done. Down for the count. Cannot.
Yeah. I will always hear you. That he's really, really articulating that. That is incredibly emotional. The emotional connection to anyone who's going to say, I will truly always listen. I mean, that's fairly irresistible.
Yeah. I will listen and I will shift my understanding of what you are saying based on what you are saying, even when we are in something akin to conflict. And I think it's demonstrative of that connection, right? Which is, I think, even stronger than just speaking of it.
Well, and this is just a small, silly thing, but again, I just love that this man employed subterfuge to get this letter to her. He's like, I'm going to just slide this letter under a stack of papers. I'm going to purposely leave my gloves behind. And then I'm just going to come back and be like, oh, I need these gloves. I'm going to just like pull this extra letter out from this pile of papers and be like, here you go. Nothing to see here, Mrs. Musgrove. Bye.
Yeah.
He's a man of action.
Yeah.
And resourceful.
He's a man of action, and he's putting effort in, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and you're so right, because it's like, this is also like he's writing this letter, because there's that moment while Anne and Harville are talking where he drops something because he's been listening so intensely, but of course she doesn't know that. But they're like, oh, are you ready to go? And he's like, oh, nope, gotta keep working on this.
I mean, the fact that this man was listening to Anne, writing this letter, figuring out like, okay, I gotta leave the gloves behind, I gotta slide this letter, like you can see how he successfully captained ships. You know what I mean? Like,
right? Absolutely.
He can come up with a plan, he can deploy the plan.
Well, I also like that he is crafting it on the spot, that there is something about that intensity that's really important. And so, yeah, there's a lot of raw emotion and almost brutal honesty in this letter, like truly. It's also one of the few declarations of sincere love, arguably the most extended, at least, right, that we get directly from one of Austen's heroes, which really allows us a certain amount of insight into Wentworth's character. So, Margaret, what do you think we learn about Wentworth's character as a result, and why do you think that it might be a significant choice on Austen's part to give it from his perspective?
What I think we have reestablished here is the fundamental quality that Austen is celebrating in Wentworth and sort of like in people external to the aristocratic system, which is that he sometimes says like an intemperate or an imperfect thing, but that he is always being guided by the warmth of true enthusiasm, of openness, of sincerity. Because with this book, you're contrasting him with Mr. Elliot, who's like, knows exactly how to make everyone happy. And what is interesting is if you look at Jane Austen's work as a whole, openness and sincerity is not something that her heroines really get to have a lot of. Sincerity, for sure, we understand their sincere feelings, but openness, they have to be guarded most of the time. And a lot of her writing is celebrating like judicious guardianship of your emotional state. And something that I observe a lot in Austen is the way that she's elucidating power dynamics. And it's like, if you are not safe in the room, you do need to protect your emotional vulnerability in a way that is very different. And so often we don't teach the people in power to share that vulnerability in a gracious way rather than an imposing way. And so I don't know whether that's something that Austen was conscious of when she put this, but the way so often the men are coming into the proposals with a sincere and not a posture of uncertainty, right? Where they don't know what their fate is going to be, but they are willing to put themselves in the heroine's hands. That's meaningful. And then here, to have it be like really, like you feel his beating heart being sort of like put into her hand.
Yeah.
And you get to see it and feel the weight of it entirely. And I think that is so meaningful because I think it gives you a sense that he is going to be a space where Anne can stop guarding herself so much, right? That he is going to take her into a sphere where she can model this kind of sincerity too, where it will be safe.
That's beautiful. Honestly, that idea of the security that he is actually offering by being overtly vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah, he's putting himself out there very fully and openly. He's not trying to kind of hedge or say like, hey, well, if you're kind of interested in me, like maybe I'm interested in you too. He's just like, no, this is it. Like, I love you. Full stop.
Yeah, you're the only thing I'm planning for. And Diane, I know that we're like, he's a little salty in this. And I'll say that you can observe in some of this that like his feelings of the moment also very much dictate his understanding of himself throughout time. And in a person like that, it can be a little bit difficult to be like, okay, well, you feel this very strongly right now, and therefore you've always felt it. And we've observed how attuned he is to her. And so you can credit that, like, he really has loved her all this time, even if he didn't acknowledge it to himself.
Yeah.
Even if he didn't realize it. But yeah, that's sort of like the one note in all of this is he does acknowledge, because we get their post-engagement reckoning conversation, which is actually one of the most heady fantasies of an Austen novel for me. It's like, oh, we're going to take two intelligences of equal strength who've been observing these events with equal interest and focus, and now we're going to compare records and reconcile everything. I'm like, yes, absolutely.
We're going to draw maps. We're going to figure out, okay, and you were here in the room and I was here in the room, and what were we all thinking?
Drown me in this. Thank you. So we get that. And in that, he's like, well, he asks if I had come to you after my ride with the Laconia, right? And I was not anywhere near as established as I am now, but I was slightly more established. Would you have renewed our engagement? And she's like, would I? And he's like, well, then I'm the fool, right? And so, he's still appropriately self-reflective, but Anne's very charmed that he like thinks she never looked any different or claims to.
He's like, yeah, my brother asked how you were doing. And I was like, she is as smoking now as she was 8.5 years ago. And I have never thought otherwise, not even for a second.
Not even for a second. Definitely did not tell her
family.
Gossipy, mean-spirited sister that she was so changed I wouldn't have recognized them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that there is something about that letter that it is so raw, and it is like, it does hit you. It just has always made me laugh, that line of, I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own, which is such a beautiful line. Then when you almost broke it 8.5 years ago, he's just like, lest you forget.
Yeah, I do. I still live for that and a half. It's like two kinds of people count in half years. People under the age of 10. Or I should say, under the age of 13, I think. And people in love.
Right.
Yes.
We've been dating for, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. We've been dating for a week and a half.
But it's also kind of like an echo of what he was doing at the beginning of the novel when he was like, if you'll remember in the year 6, he keeps like, dropping that, like, unless you forgot, Anne, in the year 6. Which I think, again, I love that detail.
It just makes me laugh because I'm like, oh, a little bit salty there. But I think it's also what's really happening is just like he is just being so raw and honest about like, this is how it felt. And the fact also that he really was counting the time. He's been making like hash marks on the ship wall,
right?
Like, every day without Anne. And so it is, it's very meaningful, but It is one of those things that I always think is kind of funny too, because it's like, everyone always talks about how like the broody emo boy in this book is Captain Bendick, but I think we have to give some credit to Captain Wentworth over here, who's like, remember when you broke my heart 8.5 years ago, because I will never forget, but I still love you, like,
that is fair.
Well, it's just important to remember that the emoist boy is not always actually the one with the swoopiest bangs.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's the one with the tenderest heart.
Yes. Well, and I think that kind of goes too with I applaud his ability to, be a little bit salty, right? But also I do also love that he does have that moment where he says, unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. And so that ability for him to be like, okay, I didn't act the best. I have been resentful. Right. I have been, because he's so obviously resentful at the beginning of the novel. He so obviously is still not okay with what happened.
Not over it. He is not over it.
Yeah. And so for him to, again, it's very raw. It's very honest. For him to be, even in this moment where he's like, I am so freaking in love with you, for him to be able to say, like, I have not always valued you the way that you should be. I have been weak. I have been resentful. But I do know that I have loved you. I think that that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I think that line, too, is also, like, as a pairing to that earlier line of when you almost broke it 8.5 years ago. Like, that on its own might come across as like, okay, maybe not the time to bring that up. But then the fact that, 2 sentences later, he's like, and also let me recognize the fact that I have had a hard time with this and maybe haven't always handled myself well, or, haven't always sort of like given you the credit that you deserved for everything that happened.
Yeah.
And that is sort of like that moment of the hero also, it's sort of like Darcy, right? Coming back for his second proposal and being like, let me recognize all the ways in which I was the worst. And now I'm prepared to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, I think, one of the most potent fantasies. Definitely Pride and Prejudice, I think, is frequently misunderstood as being sort of a story about like a perfect dreamboat dropping into your life. And as they say in Bridget Jones, the movie adaptation, liking you just as you are. That's not actually the story. Actually, the story is two really intelligent and strongly defined people caring enough about one another and caring enough about the other's opinion that they change and grow towards them, right? That it is about sort of like they each identify the other's voice as one worth bringing in to take them to a different level. I'm like, that's incredibly beautiful. I think you see some of that mutuality here, where Captain Wentworth has all these open, strong feelings that he shares, but he has a character for like a little bit of impetuousness, right? He is going to come back and he's going to flirt with these women in front of Anne, and he's not going to be thinking through all of the consequences of those actions. Yeah. He's not even going to be thinking very presently about like what he's doing. He's not interrogating himself very much, right? He doesn't necessarily interrogate himself as much as he ought to. And Anne is somebody who interrogates herself constantly.
All the time.
Yeah.
Just all the time.
Maybe a little too much. Just,
Yeah.
Anne is laying awake at 3 a.m., like you do, just thinking about that conversation, and I shouldn't have said that, and I should have said that differently, and
Yeah.
Yes.
A relatable queen.
Yes.
And like this was the thing I was referring to earlier, where she's sort of, Anne is talking about the different types of characters. And she says of Mr. Elliot was rational, discreet, polished, but he was not open. There was never any burst of feeling, any warmth of indignation or delight at the evil or good of others. You know who else that describes? Anne Elliot. And like, we're privy to her private feelings, so we know that there is warmth of indignation. We know that there is strength of delight. But it's not something that she's sharing with other people in the story up until that point. But this letter only happens because Anne decides to have a surprisingly open and frank conversation with Captain Harville.
Right.
Where under other circumstances, you could easily see her demurring away from delving into this further.
Yeah.
But instead of retreating from sincerity, she meets Captain Harville in it. And that shows enough of her heart openly to Captain Wentworth that he feels safe bringing his sincerity back. And that's where you get, she prized the frank, the open-hearted, the eager character beyond all others. Warmth and enthusiasm did captivate her still. She felt she could so much more depend upon the sincerity of those who sometimes looked or said a careless or hasty thing than of those whose presence of mind never varied, whose tongue never slipped.
Right.
She's basically moving herself from being that latter category of person, someone whose presence of mind never varies and whose tongue never slips, to being someone who could sometimes say a careless or a hasty thing, but will still be loved and will still be protected and will still be understood.
Yeah. Well, and I think as you've kind of just been describing it, Margaret, it's also making me realize something I probably already knew, but I'm putting a kind of a fine point on it. How much we should be giving credit to Captain Harville also in this, because she hasn't had a whole lot of interactions, but he is willing to be incredibly vulnerable about the loss of a sister, about how hard this is that his best friend is moving on, and the fact that he's willing to be open with Anne and allows her space to also react and be like, yeah, I mean, because their banter is like the banter of good friends. It really is good banter. It's great banter, but also like with significant subtext for both of them.
Big time.
So many feelings.
So many feelings. That's the other name of this book. So many feelings.
So many
I think
feelings.
that's appropriate. Yeah.
So going back to the letter, I feel like we just have to talk a little bit about why we think this continues to have such an emotional impact on people. Like, obviously, we're spending an entire episode talking about it because it is such a moment.
Mm-hmm.
People are still positively swooning over these words, putting it on sweatshirts, mugs, tea towels, anything you can find on Etsy.
One of the women on my trip came back and she got a tattoo. On one forearm, it says half agony. On the other forearm, it says half hope.
I love that. That's
gorgeous.
That's fantastic.
I'm
that
in.
is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Great choice.
Yeah. So like, why do we think this letter? Is it because we know the characters and how it relates to the rest of the novel? Is it just the words itself? And even if you had never even read the book and you just read this letter, you would still be like, wow, what is it that still hits so hard?
Well, we've talked about the central theme of this novel is pining. And it's like, you know what pining does not often get to be? Requited.
True.
That's so true. So true.
Usually it's just like something you do alone for a really, really long time. And then you're like, oh, I was in love with a person I made up in my head and it's not this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to hold these feelings to myself and walk away. And so I think to have like the ultimate pining narrative, to see it requited and to see it requited so thoroughly and satisfyingly. And to see somebody stepping into that and saying like, every moment throughout this book, Anne Elliot, when you've been like, why am I acting like this? It has been 8 years. I should be more in control of myself. To know that like he's been feeling the same way. Like you're like, oh, sometimes it is right to pine.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not alone,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes the other person is actually thinking the exact same thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that's the dream, right?
Sometimes you're just like two pine trees pining towards each other. And then you just twirl up together like a twisty cone.
One of the things that I think is also compelling about this letter, why it kind of still hits hard. I mean, I fully agree. The pining is immaculate in this. But I think that there's also something about what's at stake. There are moments where we have other heroes confessing their love where it's kind of like this is the last shot. We do have that with Darcy, where he's like, if you feel the same way, I will go and I will not bother you again. But we also have Knightley, who's like, I will care for you no matter what. Whereas Wentworth is very, very clear. He's like, I will enter your father's house tonight or never. And it's because like they both have been holding on to this for 8.5 years. That it's like we need to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the fact that he's half agony, half hope, the fact that there is this kind of, the stakes have never been higher for him to be that vulnerable, for him to say, I realize that if this doesn't go down, then that is 8.5 years of pining that need to be put in a box at this point. There's something about that makes that incredibly compelling. I think it is something for us to also think about the fact that this is a man putting himself in that vulnerable situation.
Mm-hmm.
where, we've been getting it from Anne's perspective for the majority of the novel, the fact that we do have a man willing to be that vulnerable. I think that's beautiful. I think that Austen putting so much raw emotion in this letter is also, I think this is perhaps me like imposing meaning here a little bit, but this is also Austen's last novel. We get a sense of what's at stake here as well. The fact that this is her last romance that she's going to be writing. I think this is super nerdy Zan moment where I confess when I was traveling in Winchester, which is where Jane Austen died, there's a small little park right across from the house that she was in, and I read this letter with a group of students. It was a study abroad thing, and there was a group of students, and we read this letter in that particular setting. And I think that in some ways cemented that idea of finality into this letter as well, that this is essentially Austen's final letter to us as her readers as well, which is incredibly poignant.
I mean, come on, Zan. Like, now I'm going to cry. Why? Why did you do that to me?
Why would you play us like that, Zan?
Yeah. So rude.
Just, strip you all vulnerable emotion right here.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're right? Like, it hits so deeply on so many levels and for so many reasons. And I think it impacts each individual reader, right? Depending on that person's own history, their own relationships, whether, familial, romantic, whatever it is, friendships. That I think that this letter just speaks to so much. When you have so many feelings and you are struggling to express them, and then to have this letter where somebody has so acutely expressed all of their feelings and not in a filtered way. You know what I mean? Like, he's writing this on the fly, right? This isn't like, I have composed this letter. This is not like the fifth draft, right? This is just like, I am writing this as I am thinking. And this is it. You're getting it straight from my brain.
And that he's having to write it like in adjusting to like the moment. It's so spontaneous. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's just like deeply relatable to people, right? Like, and you think about all those conversations and those are the things I wish I would have said. And those are the regrets that I have. And then just that line, like, half agony, half hope. Yes. Yeah. Tattoo that on my arms, right? Like, I get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So many little moments in that letter because it is shifting so constantly. I think that that's also part of the why, not just that it's emotionally raw, but that it is able to give us such a range of emotions is because he's adjusting to moment by moment. So there's a certain amount of, there's a little bit of lack of a single train of thought, which allows us for him to just be like, you sink your voice, but I still hear you. This like, he's reacting on the fly on paper, which is allowing a very wide range of emotions as well.
Yeah. And it's also creating a permanent document of like immediate response, which is not always something that you get, especially not in this era. Like, now that's a little bit more common because you're going to have a text conversation where you're going to go back and forth. And unfortunately, like, you will have a permanent record there.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like a really heady mix between something that's like permanent, but also something that has that immediacy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, she's going to pull this out like every anniversary. She's going to be like, let's read the letter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's like, I would like you to read it out loud for me, please and thank you.
Right. Right.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us for this unpacking of this, like a truly momentous occasion in this novel, right? The ultimate letter.
I'm so honored.
So can you tell our listeners about where they can find you, any upcoming pilgrimages that people might be able to join, all of that good stuff?
So the best place to keep track of me these days is at Mrs. Friday Next on Instagram. I'm that on most social platforms, but Instagram is where I'm most active these days. For upcoming pilgrimages, sadly, my Northanger Abbey pilgrimage is sold out. But if we have any more modern-oriented piners listening, I am going to be running a pilgrimage on Taylor Swift's albums Folklore and Evermore down Cape Cod this November. And so, like, if you can think of something better to do than coming and analyzing August with me in November, Well, we're not the same person, and I think that's beautiful. So that's one thing you can do. You should follow the account for our romance-centric podcast, Hot and Bothered, which is at the RomPod on Instagram. And that's where you'll hear of my future Austen classes. I definitely have a Pride and Prejudice class that will be happening before the end of the year. So that's a great thing. And right now, especially coming back from this persuasion pilgrimage, I think what was amazing is being around 16 women who deeply identify with Anne Elliot. You're like, oh, wow, I never want to go back. And in that spirit, one of the classes that the company is offering, taught by one of our Divinity School students, interns, Natalie Folkert, is going to be a do-it-yourself literary patron saint workshop. Ooh. Where you'll interact with different kinds of literature and you'll sort of figure out how to take those identifications, like I know I'm an Anne Elliot, and through ritual and like formal meditation, sort of turn them into something that can serve and direct you like a compass, right? Rather than just being something that you like feel really intensely.
Okay.
So that's one that I think would be especially interesting to folks who love persuasion.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to pitch for you right now. Oh, wait, I also have a newsletter. I have a newsletter. It's twobossydames.substack.com. It's whimsically named because there are now 3 of us who run it. But that is just where we all get to meditate on whatever is happening on the internet that we think is interesting. And that's another great place to keep in touch with me.
Excellent.
Well, thank you again, Margaret, for coming on and chatting about Captain Wentworth's letter with us.
Yes, thank you.
It was such a delight.
Thank you again to Margaret H. Willison for joining us for this episode. You can find us on Instagram at The Thing About Austen and on Twitter at Austen_things. You can check out our website, thethingaboutausten.com, and you can email us at thethingaboutausten@gmail.com. And you can find our merch for the podcast on Redbubble at aboutausten.redbubble.com.
Stay tuned for next episode when we'll be talking about the Lake District.
Thanks for listening. Bye.